right. Great. So we should be golden now. Well, welcome everybody to the Big Muddy Speaker Series. And I'm Steve Schnarr. I'm the Executive Director of Missouri River Relief. And I'm joined with a few faces that you guys will get to meet here in just a second. And even more may pop on because we've got 3 presenters tonight talking on the same topic. And then we have a panel of experts to handle your questions when we get to the end. So, you know, again, the Big Muddy Speakers Series happens on the second Tuesday of every month. Every month I can get a speaker, that is, so almost every month. And always happens at 7 o'clock. For the time being, we're going to continue doing this on Zoom, but I anticipate sometime in the pretty near future that we will start having actual real live in-person talks with groups of you as well, hopefully back out at Les Bourgeois Bistro. So keep tuned for that. Hopefully we'll be kicking that into gear sometime in the summer. Just a few things to kind of update you guys on that's going on with Missouri River Relief. This weekend, we are doing our first of the season Big Muddy boat rides out at Cooper's Landing. So these are boat rides in our big passenger boat, and we are taking, at this point, 8 people at a time. We're still kind of social distance, wearing masks and all that stuff. As the year goes on, we're going to keep doing these once a month, and just to fit in with our weirdo schedule, they just sort of jump around in the month every month. But this weekend, I think we might now be sold out. So sorry about that if you missed that opportunity. And then throughout the summer, spring and summer, we're going to have a few of these that are targeted towards specific groups. So the first of those is going to be in May. So May 14th and 15th, we're focusing on veterans and their families and friends. So those of you that are veterans out there, we're really targeting this at you folks. So we want you to get together groups of your friends. And these are for donation only. We give a suggested donation, but by no means is that required. And we're trying to raise some funds to really defray the cost of this event. But it's super fun. We did it last year, and the way it works is we have schedules all throughout the day, and these are 2-hour boat rides. If there are sandbars visible, we're going to go visit them. If they're underwater, we'll just spend some time floating on the river and answering questions about the river and talking about the river. So it's an absolute blast and a real treat. So those are at Cooper's Landing. And again, the first ones are this weekend. I got that wrong. It's not this weekend. It is next weekend. So those rides are, I think, April 22nd and 21st and 22nd, Friday and Saturday. I do know that Sunday down at Cooper's Landing is somewhat of an Earth Day little shindig as well, with music and some booths from local groups. So that will be happening as well. So another thing that we are just now kicking off, and we'll be sharing some more information coming really soon, but we have a program in June for 3 weeks of June on Tuesdays and Thursdays called Mornings at the River. And this is targeted for kids and their families age 0 to 5. So the really young ones. And Kristen is cooking up some really cool activities. So these would be like 2 hours of getting together with good people down by the river and learning stuff about the river. And just, for age 0 to 5, it's all about the experience and the visual, so that's going to be awesome. And if you have friends or family in that age group, definitely keep your eyes peeled. We'll be turning out some info on that sometime in the next month. This weekend, we are helping out at an event that our friends at Greenway Network are doing in St. Louis. And this is really highlighting an effort on the Mississippi River to stop plastic pollution in our big rivers. So this is kind of an initiative started by the Mississippi River and Towns Initiative. And we're helping a kickoff event Saturday at North Riverfront Park. That goes from 9 till noon, and there is a cleanup involved in that. So if you are interested, go to the Greenway Network website. They've got a registration tab. Check that out, greenwaynetwork.org. Those are just a few of the things that are kicking around right now. Really glad that everyone could tune in to us tonight. I'm going to take a break for my later video edit and welcome you guys again to the Big Money Speakers series. So our talk this evening is about one of those rare and amazing positive environmental and agricultural getting together and finding solutions for living next to and working with the Missouri River. And to help us really kind of dig into the project that happened, we have three different folks that are going to be presenting for us. And first of all, we'll have Barbara Cherry from the Nature Conservancy. She is the strategy manager of floodplains and nature-based solutions, which is in my top 10 coolest job titles of all time. That just sounds amazing. We also have Karina Zhang from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and she's a district engineer Sorry, just got a phone call. Need to turn my phone off. And she's going to be joining us for sort of the engineering perspective of this pretty amazing project, and kind of sharing the details of how it works and some of the maps that really kind of give you that bird's eye view of how it works. We also have Chris Hamilton from the Natural Resources Conservation NRCS Services, which is really an amazing agency within the U.S. Department of Agriculture that works on boots on the ground all over the U.S., working with landowners and farmers to find solutions to help control pollution at the source in agricultural fields. And in this case, the project that they worked on, which I'm going to let them, describe to you in much better detail. I should also point out that a good friend of mine, David Crane, his video is also showing up here. He's on our panel of experts to help answer your questions at the end. I met David doing river cleanups up in the Omaha area, but he's been working with the Corps of Engineers as a biologist and also, managing some of these massive projects to reintroduce habitat and make it align with the use of landowners adjacent to the river. So the way this is going to work is we're going to start out with Barbara from the Nature Conservancy, and she's going to actually show us a video that the Nature Conservancy put together about this project that really kind of digs in and gives us a real feel for like the people involved and what it means to the people on the ground. Perfect way to kick this off. And then we're going to talk to Karina after that and David after that to kind of hear different perspectives from different partners on this project, give a little background and backbone to our understanding of it. And then we do have a panel of, I believe, 6 different folks that have different specialties related to this project. And they'll be joining us at the end for the Q&A. So if you guys do have questions during this presentation, we're going to hold all the questions till the end. There's 2 ways for you to feed your questions to us. Number one is through the Q&A button. So if you're watching us on Zoom, at the bottom is a Q&A little button. You can click on that and leave your questions. And that's probably the best way for you to do it. But there is also the chat where you can kind of leave your comments and thoughts as things are going on. And I'm going to be looking through there and moving any of your chat questions over to the Q&A, so that we can feed them to everybody towards the end and find kind of the best possible answer. If you're watching on YouTube, there is a comment section on YouTube, and I'll be keeping an eye on that as well and bumping those questions over too. So feel free to leave your questions or even comments there as well. I think I've kind of covered everything. Thank you all, Barbara and Karina and David, and for showing up tonight and sharing this pretty amazing positive story. I'm gonna pass it over to Barbara.
Great. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Good evening, everybody. So glad to be here and talk about this really amazing project. I just first want to, for those that may not be familiar with the Nature Conservancy, just share that we are the largest conservation organization in the world, and our mission is to protect the land and water upon which all life depends. And our vision is a world where both people and nature thrive. And we partnered on this project. We've invested and partnered on this project as a demonstration project of a nature-based solution to help people adapt to a changing climate and be more resilient to flooding disasters while optimizing outcomes for nature. Our role in the project, and I'll talk more a little bit about this a little later, was really as a convener, bringing partners together, assisting with real estate, and telling the story and getting the word out about the project. It's a really incredible story. It was driven by a local community that all these partners that you'll be hearing from have gotten behind to support their vision and their efforts to do something different for their flood resilience and their economy and for the wildlife in the area. So first we're going to show, it's a 17-minute video, and hopefully it will go pretty smoothly. It's also available online. If you want to look at it again at a later time. This video is funded by the Nature Conservancy and produced by Route 3 Films, which is a St. Louis company, and they did an amazing job. It really tells a story in a way that is just pretty incredible. And then we'll hear from Karina and myself and Chris and go from there. So Steve, if you want to get it started, that would be great.
All right, we're going to kick it into gear.
I've always lived pretty close to the river, and I've been in a lot of floods. It's just devastating. You go in your house and there's probably 4 to 6 inches of mud in the house. You got to scoop it outside, you got to wash it down, and you got to deal with the mold.
Every flood event seemed to get worse every time we've had it. And 2019 was exponentially worse than all the others combined. I live right on the bluff, and it was water from bluff to bluff for 200 days and damage beyond belief.
The majority, I would say, of the levee systems were overtopped, just water everywhere. If you would see before and after photos, It's the river's a small portion here and then water everywhere. It was like an ocean.
My earliest memories of the levee system and the floods go back to when I could probably barely even remember. My dad was a member of the drainage district, and the drainage district worked closely with the levee board members. The levee board members were obviously our close friends, and whether we were dealing with an issue on the levee or high water and sandbagging, at a young age, this is a family event. I mean, the whole community gets involved in it when it happens. The levee system was built around 1950, finished in 1952. For the most part, it is the same system that was here 70 years ago, and it was very effective. Today on the river, we're dealing with a whole different set of circumstances. The river is silted in, it doesn't have the capacity, and there's just not enough room for it to flow anymore. This levee was made to take water against it for a few days, and now we're getting a few months of high water, of water with very little freeboard. Those levees were not designed to have water against them for long periods of time. 93 was a bad flood, we thought. But then we come back in 2011, it's a little bit worse. Every time you fix your levee, the flood gets a little worse. Not only does it flood, but the water's got to get out. 2019 was exponentially worse than all the others combined. And that's what brought us to the realization, hey, we need to do something different. We need to do something so in 50 years, our kids' kids aren't going through this same process over and over again. The Corps of Engineers is our partner in the PL 8499 contract. They actually build the levee. The levee district is what's referred to as the sponsor. The sponsor is responsible for real estate, for setbacks, and borrow for repair. Because we're in a 100% program, that's the only part we're responsible for. After you've flooded, the Corps has to determine the least cost alternative for repair.
How do you repair a levee system? Option one is you can repair what was there and just plug the breaches, repair all the damaged sections, and bring it back to what it was originally. And really, that's our mission, is to repair to what was pre-flood. But L536 is very different. L536 was so damaged that when we were considering, well, how about do a setback, how about create a brand new levee behind it and open up the river, the cost comparison was pretty similar.
Construction of levee setbacks is a really important thing for the Missouri River, its habitat, its ecosystem, its flood risk management. And when we have opportunities to rebuild levees, that really is a great opportunity to take the time, change how we would have done things back in 1930 or 1880, think through a better place for the levee, think through a safer place for the levee, a better place for the ecosystem, and try and make a better levee system at those times. And if we can take those opportunities to spend the time to do it right, we end up with a better river system.
In terms of the benefit that a setback creates, the whole community and all the different agencies were on board and said, well, we got to do this. Let's go ahead and do it. And so that's when we ran with it.
Say you set back a mile from the current levee, all of a sudden there's thousands of acres that were on the dry side of the levee that now are on the water side of the levee. Now, we don't legally have a responsibility, but ethically, we can't just move the levee and say, hey, sorry, you're inside the levee now. So what we needed was a program to purchase that land and make those landowners whole again. A lot of them with ground that's totally destroyed, some of them with ground that's totally fine. But, you're getting to millions and millions of dollars. A levee district like ours, there's no way we could purchase that. We actually hired a consultant, and he started working through and looking at alternatives and ways to have a funding mechanism to purchase this ground. And through that, there were a lot of different agencies and interest groups, but the Nature Conservancy quickly rose to the top as the one that really had the same interest as us. They were not just looking at it for their own good.
One of the things that the Nature Conservancy can do as a nonprofit is to bring and convene people. And so that's what I did. I brought together our partners from across the state with Atchison County Levee District and the Army Corps, and just set up a partner meeting in St. Joe in August of 2019 to talk. And we identified a lot of barriers, a lot of problems, and yet there was a lot of excitement and interest in making something happen. Every single partner was critical in a variety of ways to figure out a problem, find a funding source, find a technical solution, find a political solution, and move things forward.
We had very good cooperation. Every different entity had something to gain from the levee being set back. We all had a common interest. Everybody trusted us a lot that we were trying to do what was right for the community. We needed a funding mechanism to compensate these landowners. This is where we found the NRCS.
The Natural Resources Conservation Service is a branch for the Department of Agriculture. We have several programs throughout the state where we assist landowners in conservation practices for the environment, for erosion control, water quality. The branch I work under is Easements, and working with the Corps and the Nature Conservancy, we were able to move this levee back, open the floodplain up, and with our easement program, help these farmers with some monetary value to set this ground back into an easement.
The National Resources Conservation Service has a program for permanent easements on flood ground that has been damaged by large flood events. It's much like a CRP Conservation Reserve Program, but it's not a yearly payment. It's a one-time, lifetime easement, basically. There's a couple options. But it will get a significant portion of the value of that land back to the landowners. And in turn, it turns it into conservation ground, which can be utilized by everyone. Farmers are some of the best conservationists that there are. Max Peeler is a great example of that. Max has lived and breathed the Missouri River and levee system all his life. He's a very valuable source of information for us on this whole system. And he had the communication with the Corps of Engineers. And he also is a landowner and a farmer down there in the section where we needed a setback. Out of all the landowners we had down there, we presented them with the idea of the NRCS. And of course, right away, the first one to say, hey, I'll work with you however it is, was Max Peeler.
Well, it is hard to give up the land. You think, God, you hate to give up land. But when we started looking to wetlands, it seemed like the right thing to do. Make it so people down the road can have places to hunt and fish and camp down there. And I think it'll make a really nice spot.
The NRCS got us a good portion of the market value of those farms, but we still needed a residual value to bring it up to what we really felt like they should be compensated for.
We, in our project, found ways these landowners, most of them wanted to no longer own the land, so we found innovative ways to compensate the landowner financially for that land, and so that they could have then money to invest in other farmland in another location.
So now we jump forward a year and a half, and we're full-on construction of not only levee repairs, but a setback levee. All of the contractors and all the workers and all the equipment that's being used here is our local people. And they have a personal interest in getting it fixed correctly. And the great deal is the Corps of Engineers allows that to happen. They want it just as much as us. because they see the personal interest that these workers have in repairing the levee and fixing it.
The Corps of Engineers is known for doing a lot of big deal projects, but in terms of setback projects, this is the biggest deal that our district has had to work on, in my lifetime at least. We're looking to move about 2 million cubic yards of material in less than a year, in 8-9 months. It's just an incredible amount of manpower needed to move all this material and create this new setback. Hundreds of thousands of man-hours will be utilized at the end of this project. Honestly, it's a sacrifice for people's family too, because we're working 7 days a week, 12-hour days, but the sacrifice and the man-hours and effort over a long period of time is ultimately worth it because we're helping restore the community. We're giving back in a way that's very unique that not a lot of people get to experience in their life.
L536 is an incredible demonstration project that other landowners and levee districts up and down the Missouri River can look to as one of the tools in the toolbox to help them dealing with the catastrophic flooding that we're all facing right now on the Missouri River. And it's teaching us the complexity of this type of project and the pathway forward to implementing this kind of project. The intention is to take the information here and work with all of our partners that work at the state and federal level to improve those programs so that it becomes easier for other levee districts to make this choice to use this tool.
Don't think you can't do it. There are funding mechanisms to get this done. They're not easy, but we also hope to help that become easier.
The Atchison County Levee District that we've been able to partner with has been phenomenal in terms of their dedication to work with the different landowners. They don't shy away whenever a hurdle comes. They say, well, what can we do about it? They give us different options. They just go above and beyond. It's really been a privilege to work with them.
The key, the most important ingredient was the levee board itself. Their vision, their passion and commitment and willingness to really try something new and put their time and energy into it and passion was invaluable.
I was on the levee board for quite a long time. I know a lot of the work they're having to do. I really appreciate what they're doing because I know it's taken a lot of work to do it. And the Corps of Engineers, it's taken a big deal on their part. They did a lot of work.
They label me as the president, but we're a board that works all together. And we have a very incredible board that has put in an unbelievable amount of hours on this. We all do it together.
I'm just tremendously proud of the entire team. I'm just so motivated by helping the community and seeing people get back on their feet, seeing that when people come together, you can do really incredible things. At the end of the day, it's not like a medal or money that really matters, but being able to impact and do something for your neighbor, that's so worth it. I love it.
It brings a lot of optimism about our future, that there are so many people out there working away in different agencies and landowners who are willing to take a chance and do something different, and gives me a lot of hope for the future.
For me, living on and around the river is just a way of life, like it is for many people. I could go live anywhere, but there's literally no place to live like around here. Conservation, to me, is walking the fine line of coexisting with nature and still surviving in your community and using the resources to benefit everyone. It's just not the conservation of just the river. It's the whole ecosystem that surrounds it. We all revolve around the river, whether we realize it or not. And to even clarify more how I think of it, I just had twins, and it's a little boy and a little girl, and the little boy's name is River James. And we have a great interest in keeping this ground in as good or better shape than it was for everyone, preserving the nature, and also coexisting with it. Because what we find is we both benefit each other whenever it's done correctly.
Oh, wow. So that is like a really well done look at this project. And I'm excited to learn more about it. So kind of next on deck, we have Karina Zhang from the district engineer that we saw in the film with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers out of the Omaha district. So Karina has a little bit to share with us too, just to kind of give us some context to the size and scope of this project, because this Atchison County levee is actually just a huge, massive system, and it's kind of difficult to grasp how big it is until you get some of those aerial views. So, Karina, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to let you take over.
Good deal. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Barbara. Appreciate you all joining and taking some time out of your evening to learn more about L536 and just this project in general. And let's see here. I'm going to share my screen. I'm excited to share some photos. But like Steve shared, my name is Karina Zhang, and I work in the construction division for the Corps of Engineers. And so that's kind of the lens that I look through this project is construction, love moving the dirt, and being out there in it. And so what we'll chat about today is really that construction perspective and what it took and just the context of everything. So in 2019, you saw in that video, a lot of damage was done. I'm sure a lot of you experienced that firsthand, even in your homes. And so in 2019, overall, the flooding that occurred created approximately 50 breaches, which was really unprecedented in our family of levees. And so in this kind of green area here, you can see Omaha is up over here, and L536 is down here. It's our most southern levee system, and it is approximately this shape over here on your right-hand side. You can see about where it is spaced towards I-29. And like you heard in the video, the primary failure mode was overtopping. It was that much water that occurred, and so that's why there was so much damage in terms of the breaches. And L536 specifically, just to give you an idea of the amount of damage, there were 5 total breaches, and the breaches themselves were about, the maximum was 60 feet deep and totaled in about 0.4 miles, so almost a half mile of just holes in the levee system. And then the damage in general, there was almost 11 miles of levee, of that entire levee system that you can see here, that needed some sort of repair. And this image here was what we called the G breach. We gave them all letters, and you can see it just looked like an ocean. It was pretty incredible. And so for the Corps of Engineers side, when this happens, in the video, it shared a little bit about the guardrails that we work within, which is PL 8499. And when we go into repair the levee system, we need to consider all the different alternatives And the least cost technically viable solution is the one that we end up going with, just the way the law is written. And, you know, when sometimes an emergency and a devastation occurs, sometimes you just get an opportunity of what can you do differently. And this was when we were presented, and really appreciate the levee boards just thinking outside the box and said, well, what about realigning the levee? And when we did all of our different analysis, it was actually the least cost technically viable solution. And so when we thought about that, we went in and had to accept a few risks that the other levee systems we didn't have to consider those. And so a few of those there was a short timeline for the sponsor to acquire the real estate for the new footprint. And you all can imagine, you know, when even purchasing a home can take quite a bit of time. You can imagine getting real estate secured for about 4.5 miles of new levee. That takes a tremendous amount of effort. And so during that time, we all had to accept that there was going to be no level of protection for this amount of time. For the first year, there was no level of protection because we would have to go through this real estate process. We also didn't know the suitability of all the material to build the new levee. We had to make a lot of assumptions of where the clay was coming from, where the sand was coming from, the core. And so there was a lot of uncertainty, but what I really appreciated from the team is, well, we make assumptions and then we go with it and then we adjust as we find out more information. And so that's so some of the highlights I want to share with y'all that really the team brought together. There was a lot of innovation in order to build this, the new levee. And a few of them was when we were awarding the contract, we actually did a virtual site visit. And this was before COVID happened too, but there was no way to access the site. So we did a virtual visit. We also made use of an existing tool that the Omaha district utilized, which is a cost reimbursable contract vehicle. And what that allowed was, because we couldn't fully design, we didn't have all of the different variables defined. This contract vehicle allows us to move out and construct quickly without while we continue to define the features. A couple cool things too, and I'm going to show some photos of this, is we used pipeline dredging and we dredged sand from the Missouri River to place the sand seepage berms that had never been done before. We did utilize dredging to make breach closures early on. And so actually one of our construction leads, his name's TJ Davey, he said, well, why don't we use it to actually create the seepage berms? And it worked phenomenally. And what that allowed was, not only did we save money, but it was actually 3 times faster to place it in that way. I'll show some photos here in a little bit, but we also use these winter tent enclosures. I'm sure a lot of you experienced the polar vortex that happened a couple months ago back in February. And that was, and you can see in the photo down here towards the right, we kept working and we were able to house approximately 30,000 cubic yards in these tents. And what that allowed was to keep moving and achieve our target of getting the levee system back at full height by the first week of March. So that was phenomenal. And just as you could hear in the video too, there's a lot of collaboration and partnering across many different agencies, different disciplines, you know, people who have a lot of different interests, but we all wanted to work together to just seize the different win-win opportunities, so to speak. And here's some cool photos. So this is, if you see here, there's a little map in the middle, and you're looking towards the southern end. We were placing, placing the sand seepage berms for the new levee. And you can kind of see this timeline back in June before we cleared anything. And then when we prepared the foundation, and then you can see here our dredging operations. We actually had 2 placements going on at the same time, and we were able to funnel the water into existing ditches. And once that water settled out, you get these beautiful sand seepage berms. And the photo on the right there, that is the most recent photo. It's got the fully encapsulated levee with clay and then the sand seepage berms. And it's just, it's really incredible to see what folks can accomplish in such a short amount of time. And a quick highlight in terms of that borrow material, that was one of our, if anyone's considering building new levees, one thing to consider is where you're going to get your borrow material, your clay, your sand, your random core. And we really partnered with NRCS, getting assistance in terms of working together with them, the landowners, to use their land, and also the Missouri River Recovery Program that's within the Corps. Just all a unique different folks that offer different perspectives all coming together, and you can even see kind of this new alignment here. But really appreciate your guys' time and just wanting to learn more about this. And so let's see, with that, I'm gonna see if I can stop sharing my screen here. Let's see. But I sure appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over back to Barbara to talk a little bit about the partnering that we, that really was instrumental in making all of this happen. So thanks, Barbara.
Great. Thanks, Karina. It's really interesting seeing the construction process. It's an emergency process, and all this had to happen really fast. So, as we talked about in the video, I got a call, and one of those big needs was that real estate funding. And so something that, Nature Conservancy I was able to do was really bring everybody together and figure out, seemed like such a no-brainer. It was something the community wanted to do, very exciting, but huge hurdle of getting the real estate funding quickly to meet this emergency repair need. And so we just continue to meet as partners and figure out ways to overcome obstacles and continue to have weekly meetings. And I'm going to just share a couple quick slides I want to highlight the partners a little bit. Let's see if I can, I don't know if I'm sharing this. Can you see the slide, Steve?
Yeah, but you may want to go to slideshow and start the slideshow so it fills the screen.
There, how's that?
Perfect.
Okay, so I just really want to highlight the partners again. I mean, you heard about them in the video, but the levee board was just phenomenal. I mean, they really drove the project, and then the state agencies were key partners. Both the Department of Natural Resources, Department of Conservation, Economic Development, and the State Emergency Management Agency. They worked really hard to figure out ways to overcome obstacles and help us solve that real estate problem. And in the end, there was an appropriation by the legislature for flood recovery from 2019, and one of the recommendations from the governor's flood recovery advisory work group was to support this Atchison County levee setback project. And so some funding came to help with that real estate for the new footprint, but also to help with the real estate for the new riverside lands, as well as from the Department of Conservation. So pretty exciting partnership and problem solving going on. And I also want to highlight again the Missouri River Recovery Program under the Corps. They own part of the land that is now riverside, that was landward side, and they also were able to help with land for that new levee, which helped with the costs a lot. So between those programs, and then you're going to hear from NRCS here from Chris, that combination of their program, the Emergency Flood Easement Program that he'll talk about, those combinations really were vital for moving this forward. So very exciting. to get that all done, and just incredible partnerships of very complex issues. So really kudos to everybody. And then just lastly, again, this is such a great demonstration project. Our role also is in that storytelling. The video you saw, you can access it at our website, www.nature.org/Mo River Levee. And we've developed that web page that tells the story, the video, a fact sheet. And we're working on a playbook, which is, we're capturing those lessons learned from this project, and how can we develop recommendations and explain what was done to other communities and agencies that may want to do this type of project in the future, and ways to make it easier for the next groups that want to do this kind of thing. So we're working on that and hope to have that available in the summer. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to share for slides. And stop sharing and pass it over to Chris.
All right, thank you, Barbara. I really appreciate everyone joining us tonight and the opportunity to speak to you folks. As has been said here, we've had a good overview of the project and the collaborative efforts. I want to touch one on the collaboration effort, and then secondly, what our programs for NRCS bring together. I'm the Assistant State Conservationist for Water Resources and Easements for NRCS. And the programs that we manage that are pertinent to this effort are, one, the Wetland Reserve Easement Program, and specifically for this setback is the Floodplain Easement Program. And I want to get into that program a little bit, talk about our team effort up there, and again, the collaboration effort. So the Floodplain Easement Program under the Emergency Watershed Protection Program is funded through authorization by Congress. So there has to be an emergency, a natural disaster emergency to occur, and then funds are appropriated by the NRCS, or to the NRCS, depending on where the damage occurs. And then what task our state and my teams to do is then to open up an application period for these for the potential landowners that are impacted, the land that's impacted by, in this case, flooding. And when this happened, one of the very early things that occurred because of the breaches up there was obviously landowners that were in need. And what this program offers is a perpetual easement that we would purchase from the landowner. The landowner then maintains ownership of that land, and we can restore the land back to its natural conditions and pre-man, pre-European man coming in here, and so we had that in our toolkit. And then we had some conversations with the Corps, and as you've heard here, all the different players like Barbara and so on, and to come together to focus on this effort. So then the local folks like Ryan really came to bear to help get the word out to those landowners that would be on the riverside of a levee setback. So you have the Corps with their program that could do the levee setback, yet NRCS with the floodplain easement program, they had the ability to purchase easements on the riverside. So those landowners are now going to be on the riverside, as you heard. We were able to offset the loss of their land through this easement program. Again, it's a perpetual easement, which is forever, but look what it does for the landscape and the health of the river. We're backing the levee off. Then the land will be restored to habitat that somewhat emulates what was there historically. Not only provides habitat for species along the river, and also helps with water quality issues, etc. So that was how NRCS came in to bear on the floodplain easement program. As I mentioned, we also can restore those areas. The Corps is we're working closely with the Corps on that part of it. We have a wetland team that's led by David Richard, our wetland team leader for that part of the state. And Mike McClure is the MDC wetland biologist. Also on staff is Mike Holzer, who's been up there every week working directly with the Corps as they, as Karina pointed out, the Corps needed borrow for the levees, and we are looking at how we would restore it. And that's how we're working so closely, is to restore it to maximize the ecological lift, if you will, on those restorations. But also we are able to provide borrow for the levees. So it really is an awesome collaboration. I would put NRCS, the wetland teams here in Missouri, second to none in the nation for our ability to do these restorations. Honestly, that is the truth. And so to have that ability, plus working closely with the Corps biologists too, like Dave Crane, it really is a neat effort that's happening. And the one other thing I want to add, and David Richard and Mike McClure are on the call to help answer any questions that you have, is that to step back and look at big picture here in Missouri, specifically to the Missouri River for the folks on this call, we have restored over 32,000 acres in the Missouri River floodplain with the wetland reserve easements and floodplain easements. And also there's one stretch between the Grand and the Sheraton River, the mouths of those rivers on the Missouri, that is almost a contiguous riparian corridor of WRE easements, those wetland reserve easements, 7.5 miles between there. So, and most of that's going to be closed up because we have some more floodplain easements that are going in this round in that area. And statewide in Missouri, we have 165,000 acres. We're one of the top states in the nation with that, in the easement programs. Majority of those are wetland reserve easements. And so think about the habitat that's being put on the landscape. To me, I'm a bit biased. I've worked in this program since '92. It's the best program that we ever had. That was the inception of the program. And what is done on the landscape is unbelievable. We're taking marginal land out of production. It's a program that's available to landowners, and they have, it's just a win-win. The landowners are able to get compensated for land that's hard to farm. They also maintain ownership, as I mentioned earlier. So it is a really great program, and look forward to answering any questions you have about that. We just hit the 5 million acre milestone here the last few months nationwide for these easement programs. So that's all I have, and we'll be around to help answer questions. Thank you very much.
Chris, thank you so much. And I think in the beginning of this talk, I did not introduce you fully, Chris. So that was Chris Hamilton. He's the Assistant State Conservationist for Water Resources and Easement with NRCS, giving us kind of a detailed look into the role that they play in this whole patchwork of things. Let's see, we've got a lot of people that potentially could be hopping on here. And let's see, I was going to try to see if I could change the view here. Doesn't look like I can. I was going to try to get kind of a gallery view of everybody, but I think the way it's going to work is whoever's talking, their image is going to hop onto the screen. So we've started getting a few questions from the audience, and I'm going to start with those. I've got a few questions too, but before we hop into those, Barbara or Karina, is there anything else that either of you wanted to add before we hop in there? I'm not seeing anything, so I'm just going to go ahead and proceed. So the first question was from Bernie Arnold over in Arnold, Missouri, asking, with the setback of the levees, in other words, the widening of the available channel for the river, what is the estimated change in river elevation given the same flood conditions? And so before we get into the answer to that, I do want to say this is going to be a little complicated because we do have like 6 additional people on this call that can answer some of these. So figuring out the right person to do that will be complicated. But of course, we can start with the district engineer, with the Corps of Engineers, and see what Karina has to say, or if you want to pass that on.
I appreciate it. And a lot of great questions I was looking at. So thank you guys just for being engaged and wanting to learn more about this project and trying to apply it to your own communities too. But for that question, I think Lowell Blankers, he's with our engineering division over at the Corps of Engineers, I think he would be a much better person to answer that. Lowell, what are your thoughts? Let's see, that question was, what is the estimated change in river elevation given the same flooding conditions? I think I know the answer, but I'm not too sure and want to, I think you're the man for that question.
And so Lowell.
Sorry, double mute, sorry. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we looked at the 100-year discharges and we looked at what impact this project would have on those. And we saw about 0.8 of a foot decrease in the river elevation for the 100-year flood event. And as you move upstream, that gradually phases out.
So just to clarify, Lowell, that was 0.8 of a foot?
Yep, correct. So about a little more than 3/4 of a foot decrease in the 100-year elevation. And so when we have a large flood event, that could be the difference maker with the levee either passing the flood or potentially it overtopping.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And, I really should run through the list of panel experts that we have to field some of these questions as they come in, which should also spur you in the audience to come up with some really good questions. So feel free to keep feeding those into the Q&A in the chat. But some of the folks we have on board are Mike McClure, who was mentioned earlier from the Department of Conservation, Jeffrey Bolkin, also with the Army Corps of Engineers, David Crane with the Army Corps of Engineers, David Richard from I believe also NRCS, and Lowell Blankers with the Corps of Engineers too. So we've got kind of a bunch of different perspectives to fill in the blanks here. The next question was from Bill Muni. I believe Bill's coming at us from Kansas City. Was there any consideration to increasing the height of the new levee?
Well, I think you might be a good person to fully answer that one.
I can take that one too. So the PLA 8499 program is the authorization is what the Corps of Engineers uses to rehabilitate those levee systems. Within that program, we are specifically limited to constructing the levee back to pre-flood conditions, which doesn't allow us with that authorization to raise the levees.
So even if you're
part of that reason, I guess maybe I should explain, the part of the reason why that is that program is designed specifically to get people back up on their feet, to repair the levees, and get people living, working, and thriving behind the levee systems.
And also, Lowell, is part of the reason why increasing levee height after reconstruction is not allowed is the intention also to sort of decelerate this battle of the levees that can happen between different sides of the river or different parts in the river?
Yeah, that's part of it, is that we certainly can't raise a levee system and transfer risk to others, which would play into what you referenced, kind of a levee height race between the left bank and right bank.
And I don't know, this next question seems like a Corps of Engineers question too. So we'll go to Karina and you can pass it on if you want to. But Amy Meyer was wondering, how will the 8-foot addition to the Hamburg, Iowa levee impact this project? So a little bit upstream, Hamburg, Iowa was able to build a taller levee, kind of a donut around the town, if I understand that correctly, which is, a little ways from the river in some of these levees that we're talking about. But first of all, wondering, if that's correct, do we have that story right, that they were able to build an 8-foot taller levee there at Hamburg? And does that sort of thing impact any of these agricultural levees?
So, hi, my name is Jeff Bolkin. I'm with the Corps of Engineers. So the Hamburg levee, it has not been constructed. They did some emergency repair work during the ongoing flooding, but we just recently, as of the last couple of days, awarded that contract to do that levee raise. The reason that levee can be raised is because we're using the Section 1176 authority of WERDA 2016, if memory serves me right. That's the right year. And what that basically says is that the levee sponsor can request that we look at doing a levee raise. The Corps of Engineers, like Lowell was just saying, we have to look at it and make sure that there's no negative impacts. So getting to the question, no, there will not be negative impacts or impacts to the 536 levee system from the work at Hamburg. And then after that determination, because PL 8499 cannot pay, the program itself cannot pay to do anything beyond restore to the pre-flood condition, that becomes a non-federal levee sponsor expense. So the city of Hamburg has worked with the state of Iowa to provide funding for that work. So just probably a little long-winded there, but it kind of tied into our last question about how under 8499 the authority gives us just the ability to restore the levee to what it was pre-flood.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff. And so the next question is coming from Stephanie in Rocheport. And this might be a good one for Chris. And I think Barbara might also have something to add to it as well. But wondering if someone could give specifics as to what each partner contributed, the amount of money for each part of the project, and like where that money came from. There's a lot of talk about partnerships and raising funds, but we know that NRCS was able to pay, the easement part of that equation. But if you guys could fill out some of the blanks.
Sure, this is Chris. The easement portion of it, we were in the $4 million range, I believe. David, if you're on, if you can correct me on the exact amount. So in that part of the world, our rate cap for purchasing easements is around a little over $4,000 per acre, and so that gives you a ballpark. And I'll let David weigh in if you're on, David, to give me an idea of the exact amount, and that would be NRCS's portion only.
So this is Barbara. So just to, there's a lot of pieces to this, right? There's the reconstruction part, all of the construction dollars, and that all comes from the Army Corps, 100%. And that is, my understanding, that's taxpayer dollars, part of that program. And that's the biggest chunk. And I'm throwing out 100 million-ish, give or take, dollars for this particular project. Karina, you can maybe help me be a little finer on that, or, I think that's around an estimate I heard. Is that?
It is on that magnitude.
Yeah.
And that includes everything for construction, including some of the temporary measures that we did early on, and also repairing the original that goes up into the Rock Creek portion. So it's more than just the the realigned levee. But yeah, that's the magnitude.
Yeah. So there's that piece. That's a big piece of it. And then there's the real estate needed for the new footprint of the new levee. And that was provided through the State Emergency Management Agency through appropriations to help with flood recovery. And then there was the money needed for the new Riverside lands. And as Chris pointed out, the landowners enrolled in the NRCS's FPE program, and I believe he said around $4 million. And then those landowners wanted to no longer own the land. And so the idea is then to, once they're enrolled in that program, purchase the land from them. That's where the Nature Conservancy comes in. We're going to be purchasing that from them. And it's probably around the $1 million plus side, give or take. And that again, the funding is being provided through the state, MDC, and State Emergency Management. And ultimately, eventually, these lands will probably go and become part of that MDC conservation area that it's adjacent to. So it's a big puzzle and a lot of pieces. And the Army Corps program is not responsible for the real estate. That is the responsibility of the levee district. And so to do a project like this is a large, there's a large amount of real estate that's needed, which is really out of the scope of a small community. And that's why, we needed to get creative and bring together a partnership to sort of figure out how to make it all work, how to make all the pieces work.
Hey, Steve, I realize that I did not answer the entire question regarding where the funding came from. As I said in my portion of the presentation, NRCS funding came from the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, floodplain easements, and that is allocated by Congress based on a natural disaster event. And that is, and the way those funds are then allocated is that we open up a application period for landowners that would meet the criteria to be eligible for the program, meaning they've sustained flood damages, et cetera. We have a whole ranking process to go through. In this instance, these particular landowners rank some of the highest in the state. And then also, could you possibly unmute David Richard? He was going to provide a little more feedback on the amount of money. He just sent me a message saying he couldn't unmute his call.
I don't actually see him in our panelist list, so let me see.
It may be a phone number only, so if that's the case, then we're fine. I'm pretty close to the estimate of NRCS had.
Okay. Yeah, if he came in on a phone, and would it be a 660 number? Does that sound right? I'm going to give that a shot. Do you want to try, David, to go ahead and speak right now?
It ends in 2543.
Okay, that's it. So all right. I guess I'm asking you to try unmuting yourself now, David. I think I've allowed you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep. All right. We got it figured out. Yeah. Chris and Barb covered it pretty good there when they both answered. Yeah. Each landowner on cropland was reimbursed 4,200 acres or $4,200 per acre. The exact amount will be after we get these easements surveyed and we know exactly what the exact acres are, and they'll be reimbursed at that time.
Okay, great. And then in addition, when
this is Craig chiming in for the Missouri River Recovery Program. So there was about 600 acres of the land that was to be made riverward associated with the setback project. And, this was part of the real estate burden that was taken off of the levee sponsor. And so, just roughly, speaking of rough numbers, 600 acres would probably be between $4 and $5 million worth of real estate. So that was part of the real estate burden that that was taken by essentially the recovery program helped relieve that burden from the levee sponsor.
Okay, great. So it's complicated is one answer to that. It's expensive is another answer. Now, I'm going to ask this question. So it sounds like $4,200 went to purchase the easement from riverward landowners, but then there's an additional thing when the Nature Conservancy will act as the agent to actually purchase that land. Then does some of that money also go to the original landowners? And Barbara, you probably would have.
That's right. So these landowners, again, they had the option of, they own the land and go into the easement program, but they're no longer be farming that land and didn't want to own that land. And so then it's a matter of purchasing sort of what we call the residual or the recreational values that are left after the easement's placed.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, I'm going to return to the questions. They're starting to pile up, which is super great. Bill Muni, again from Kansas City, I believe. Considering this effort as one large infrastructure project, what would be the total budget? So there's a lot of math. He's asking, is that 100 million plus? And I think we did hear that 100 million is the Corps of Engineers construction budget alone. And then the real estate, which is kind of a lesser number than that. So adding everything up that people have talked about today, we're somewhere in the 110 to 120 million. Does that sort of ring a bell, or did I do that wrong?
I think something to consider in the budgets too would be all of the planning that has to take place in terms of those efforts. So those can vary depending on like the design phase. That all takes some amount of time, and I don't have that number off the top of my head, but that is something to consider if other folks are looking to do that as well.
And the other thing I think to continue to remember with this particular project is it was a recovery project, right? So this is a repair project. The Corps was going to be spending, that $100-ish million, regardless of where that levee was put back, and based on their designs and based on the cost of doing the actual construction, this was the least cost option. So, yeah.
Right, those kinds of expenditures of the Corps of Engineers construction were happening up and down the river in many more levee districts than this one levee district. This is one levee district that shows a different path for that, recovering from the flood and thinking about the future. This is a similar question, but a little more specific to the one about flood elevation from before. So Bob Vierig was wondering, if this setback had been in place in 2019, he's asking how much flood damage would have been prevented up and down the river. I mean, kind of a corollary to that is, would this have kept the levee from overtopping is another question. And we heard before from Lowell that this can shave, a little more than 3/4 of a foot off the elevation of a flood in this area. But a little more specifically, how does that compare to the height in 2019?
Well, Lowell might be a better person to answer that. It's difficult to say in terms of would overtopping still would have occurred, but this levee implemented designs that the Corps has learned over time, and so on the backside of the levee, it's at a shallower slope. It's a 5-to-1 slope versus a 3-to-1, and that's just over time, designs change, and we learn more, and so we try to implement lessons learned over time. So it likely would have reduced damages, but it's tough to pinpoint a number. I don't know if either Jeff or Lowell want to comment further on that.
Yeah, you bring up some good points, Karina, on kind of some things that from an engineering standpoint, we've applied some resiliency to our designs since the original construction with the milder side slopes on the landward side that help kind of resist that overtopping damage that we saw so prevalently in 2019. I guess each flood event is unique. 2019 was a very large flood event and certainly would probably have still overwhelmed the system if it was in place. Just really hard to answer that question on what kind of damages or would have been prevented if it was in place at the time.
Well, if you thought that was complicated, here comes another one. And this is from Rob Jacobson in Columbia. And this question is for Karina. And I guess sort of making the assumption that this project was something like $120 million, a back of the envelope calculation would suggest that this kind of setbacks for the whole river system, which, you know, nobody at this point is suggesting, but you know, when we think about the success of one project, we have to think about, is this something we could replicate like system-wide? You know, just saying that could be $10 to $25 billion for the system. And what are the implications of thinking that big for a project like that? And is anyone thinking that big?
Those are great questions. And from an engineering standpoint, or like kind of a technical sort of construction vantage point, I'm probably going to answer the question with another question in terms of what are all of the options and what is, I think when the Corps looks at a problem, it's good to evaluate what are all the different options. So, I mean, if you wanted to just implement the solution across the board, that probably would be in that magnitude. But the question really would be trying to, you know, put the problem statement to each system or just holistically as a system and figure out what are all the different alternatives. Because, and that's why I would say L536 was really successful, is we all understood what the problem statement and the mission statement rather, and tried to exhaust what are all the different options. And so it's probably a different maybe frame of thinking. Jeff, I think you're probably a little more savvy in answering that question. I'm going to maybe turn it over to you.
So I think it's a good question. It's been a question that's been asked to us, maybe not in that exact way, but in a bunch of different ways, many times over the last couple of years. And in response to that, what Congress has tasked the Corps of Engineers to do is to do this system-wide study on the Missouri River. So we're looking at partnering with the 4 states of Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, and Nebraska. We signed an agreement because the study efforts have a cost share component. So we signed an agreement with the states back in September. And the whole purpose of that study is to look at the system along the Missouri River and see, are there areas where things can be done to help address flood risk along the lower Missouri River? So that is just getting started. What will likely come out of that is a system study and then potentially some other maybe project locations. Could it be a setback? That's definitely a possibility, but it could be a lot of other things as well along the way. So that is an effort that we're undertaking. We're in the kind of the beginning stages of that. And I think there'll be more to follow over the next couple of years.
Awesome. This question is directed to Chris Hamilton, and David Crane may also have something to add as well. But what is the restoration goal for the riverward easement lands? Is it like bottomland hardwoods or soft riparian areas? Is it wet meadow? And what are the implications in the future, depending on the choices that you make, for the hydraulic roughness and conveyance of floodwaters? So just for the audience's sake to explain, if you have a dense forest or willow thickets or a open meadow next to a river like the Missouri River, and the river overfloods that area, each of those different ecotypes is going to allow floodwater to move through at kind of different flow rates. So a forest might slow the water down more, meaning less water is moving through there, meaning overall your flood elevation might go up. If you have an open area that's not a forest, then you may have more floodwater conveyance, I think is what Rob's going after, just based on the bar conversations I've had with him in the past. But
all right, I'll take a shot at that. Rob, good to hear from you, and I'll take the first shot. Then I'm going to have Mike McClure, who is the MDC biologist on our wetland team, follow up. We actually just had discussions about that today, and we're working with Dave Crane on that also. But the overall, the program goals for the floodplain easement program, as with WRE, is to provide habitat for migratory waterfowl, neotropical migrants, etc. And again, as I said in my presentation, is that we look at what was historically there in the floodplain, and also remember this is. And Rob gets this will now be on the riverside of the levee. So we do not advocate a lot of planting in these scenarios. Mother Nature will take care of that. We look at the restoration, do the micro or macro topography, if you will, which is being done right now because of the borrow that was taken for the levee, and we're working closely with Karina and her team to have that restoration that will provide a variety of habitats. So the goal in this scenario will be looking at bottomland hardwoods with maybe some slough type areas, etc., and very limited planting, and maybe on some slopes and stuff, some native warm seasons, etc. Mike McClure, would you follow up on that, please?
Yeah, you hit it pretty good, Chris. That land that was formerly protected is going to be a lot lower than the land that's currently riverward. So it's gonna catch up a lot. It's going to be very dynamic. So our plan is to allow natural regeneration to occur out there, whether it be herbaceous vegetation, wet meadows, or seasonal marshes, or riverfront forest, and eventually bottomland hardwoods. It's going to change. It's going to be very dynamic out there. So with each flood, year after year after year, it's going to shift. Habitats are going to shift depending on sedimentation, the deposition, where water ponds, where there's a little bit of scouring. So it's going to be very dynamic, and it's going to be it's going to shift a lot and change a lot over time. That's why we don't see a big need to invest a lot of money in planning something that is going to be at risk, just because of the dynamic nature of the position on the landscape. In working with the Corps, we tried to create a lot of depressional areas with the borrows. I think we made available somewhere off of the floodplain easements something in the neighborhood of I think it's around 1 million yards of material. Some of that is sand, some of that is cohesive material or clays. Those areas we intend to hold water. The nature of the soils there they're a little tricky. Missouri River soils are actually very tricky. They can change every 50 feet. so they are often limiting in wetland restoration. So some of the borrows we went a little deeper than we normally would in the idea of tapping into groundwater during the navigation season, so that these will be recharged from subsurface as opposed to runoff or out of bank flooding. In regards to the roughness and conveyance, that's a little bit more of an engineering question, but it was mentioned that riverfront forest is going to provide more friction, therefore it is going to slow down and it is going to stack a little bit. We would like to think that will be somewhat mitigated by the wider floodplain that's going to be created by this levee setback. There's a lot more space for the river to spread out now, so hopefully that's going to mitigate some for the floodness or the floodplain roughness. But like I said, that's a little bit more of an engineering question. Those who know me know that math is certainly not my strong suit, so I'll defer to an engineer for that one.
Yeah, so this is Dave Green. So from the Missouri River Recovery Program, perspective, I'll chime in. The majority of the property that was set on the riverward side of the setback levee is owned in fee title by the Corps of Engineers under the Missouri River Recovery Program and overlaps with an NRCS WRP easement. And so there roughly about 300 acres of borrow pit, wetlands, borrow pits that were converted into wetlands were able to be created and restored on some of that core owned property associated with the L536 project. And so, and beyond that, there's other lands, landward and riverward of the setback levee that were disturbed. As standard practice for the Corps of Engineers, civil works construction projects, will grade, especially riverward borrow pits and reseed areas to ensure that erosion issues don't occur in the future. We've got a little bit of a different approach that we'll take on landward versus riverward borrow pit wetland restoration and seeding. And so, we're still in the process of excavating some of the material from some of these borrow pits, finalizing plans for grading, vegetation establishment, seeding, what kind of seeding we'll put down, what areas we might reserve for woody vegetation establishment, where it might make sense from like a flood velocity reduction standpoint. As Mike mentioned, that might be something that's a little bit more appropriate for some of our hydraulic engineers to help model for us and help quantify. I think the overall concept of floodplain roughness, constructing levee setbacks, allowing, attempting to establish herbaceous vegetation versus just simply allowing woody vegetation to take hold, which is, practically the default what would happen. I think that might be something that four-state general investigation study might have a part in attempting to model and take a look at. I think overall there's been, the Corps has had successes in establishing herbaceous vegetation on the riverward side of large-scale levee setbacks such as this. So we're kind of still in the process of working with NRCS, the Missouri River Recovery Program, in determining exactly what kind of vegetation, regime we want to try to establish on the riverward side. What our we have our state partners in Missouri. It's the Missouri Department of Conservation that'll help manage these sites for the Missouri River Recovery Program, help with vegetation management. And so I think there's room to consider establishment of herbaceous vegetation to help kind of keep some of that woody encroachment at bay. And then there's some places that might work really well with encouraging woody establishment. So kind of still something that we're all working on, and we're all really, as a habitat conservation professionals, we're really excited to hash out the final details as we finish up the borrow pits and figure out how they're going to look and what's going to be planted in the end.
Awesome. Thanks to all of you. This we still have quite a few questions, and I know that it's getting late, but with having this many people to answer questions, I think that's just a given. It's going to take a while. So Joe Alberti asks a question, and I'm going to kind of throw this to Barbara first. But he asks, why does farmland need to change hands? Wouldn't any land previously farmed continue to be farmed? And then he says, I'm obviously not a farmer. I live in Kansas City. So just to give us kind of perspective on what are these issues driving, these conservation easements, these wetland easements, and purchasing land from previous farmers.
Sure. Yeah. So, the land that we're talking about, originally was behind a levee and was protected. And so farming was able to happen every year pretty, consistently in terms of knowing, whether the land would be flooded or not. Now that same land is on the riverside, the odds are that it's going to be flooded pretty consistently. Maybe every year, maybe not every year. I don't know for all of that land, but it puts it, there's no protection at all. And so to continue farming there would be a large scale investment for probably no return. Once you've lost the levee protection on the floodplain.
Awesome, thank you. What other rivers or states in the country is the Nature Conservancy looking into? And probably that would go to NRCS as well, where this solution can be utilized. So these nature-based floodplain mitigation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, levee setbacks are something that have been used around the country in different settings. I think what's really special about this is working with private landowners in a community, making this choice in a rural setting on the Missouri River with this particular Army Corps program. There are, so this is a model that could be used in other locations around the country. I know colleagues in California have done setbacks in a very different setting, in a more urban kind of setting where they've changed some things up. We're also working, we have a Mississippi Basin initiative. So the Mississippi Basin includes the Missouri River as one of the main tributaries, and is 31 states large. So my colleagues around the basin are working on different types of projects. Again, this is a demonstration project. So there's another project happening on the main stem of the Mississippi at Dogtooth Bend that's looking at, again, landowners who've lost levee protection. And in that case, they're not replacing the levee, and it's been repetitive loss, and they're looking at doing a restoration program there, again, using NRCS programs. So we're looking at different ways to help communities with flooding, different ways that we can, interface with our rivers for flooding, but also for nutrient reduction to help with the hypoxia zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And floodplains are key for water quality, for habitat, and for flood resilience. And so trying to enable where we can projects like this, other nature-based solutions, and support landowners who are looking for different solutions where we're working.
To kind of follow up on that, and Jeff may have something to say. Well, I saw that Chris just popped on. Maybe Chris might have something to add as well from the NRCS perspective on nation.
Yeah, just briefly, I was going to to let you know, the NRCS has these programs, the Floodplain Easement Program, Wetland Reserve Easement Program nationwide. It's available in every state. Again, the Floodplain Easement Program is tied to a natural disaster and congressional funding. And we have been involved in levee setbacks, both here in Missouri and nationwide. So they certainly are available. In fact, we have another one ongoing right now due to this flooding. And David Richard, would you like to explain to the group the other opportunity that we have and we're working on right now?
So David, if you're able to unmute yourself, if you're still on the call. Let me see if he is.
There we go. Now I'm unmuted.
All right.
Yeah, we have another one down in below the Grand River, down in Sheraton County, down Dalton, Missouri, where we're having a levee setback from the 2019 flood. It's not quite as many acres as what this one is, but it's the same situation where the landowners have applied for FPE, and that area will be put in a floodplain easement and levees. Some of those lands were on the inland side are now on the river side, and it's kind of the same situation. So we got two projects from this flood event in the state of Missouri, and I think you'll see more of this as time goes on.
Do you know, David, is that road to the boat ramp going to be rebuilt at Dalton Bottoms? Do you know if that's part of it?
I do not. I think it's going to be. That's probably managed by MDC, but Mike thinks it is going to be rebuilt.
Just curious, that question, I've seen that floating around a little bit. That area definitely got hit hard. So all of this also brings up the point that, the conversation kind of keeps going to, okay, this is a great project, but what about other places, But there's several things about this project that depended on the fact that there was a real disaster that happened. There's a lot of state emergency management funding that went into it. The Corps' rebuilding of the levees, taking that opportunity to change the footprint of the levee as part of the federal levee program. The NRCS funding that's tied to flood devastation. So, is it true? And I'm just going to direct this at Karina. Is it true that these types of levee setback projects really can only happen when there's a flood? And then, Jeff was talking about this multi-state project with the Corps and the states, trying to look at other locations where, different tactics could be taken on the river. Does that just sort of tee up areas in the future where if there is another problem in the future that there might already be a plan in place? Those are the kind of questions that sort of pop up here. Has the door closed from the 2019 flood?
That's a great question, Steve. I think, I was going to say Jeff Bolkin, I think, would be a much better person to respond to that.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's actually an important question. It's a little bit of an anomaly that the 8499 authority, the emergency repairs or rehabilitation authority, was used to do a project like this. The Corps of Engineers has a lot of different authorities given to us by Congress. So to the question, is the only way to do a setback or a project like this fall in an emergency? The answer is no. And I think maybe Barbara can talk to it a little more, but the TNC is actually working and partnering with a bunch of the partners that were involved in this project to build a playbook. And from the Corps of Engineers standpoint, that's one of the important things that we're trying to communicate, that 8499 is likely not the authority to do another project like this, because like Karina was saying, a lot of things just had to fall in place for this one to happen under this authority. But that isn't to say that there aren't other Corps of Engineers authorities that can't be used to build a project like this or something similar in the future.
Okay. Did anyone have anything to add on to that? Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I mean, obviously, everybody here would much rather that that every levee along the river could hold, and we wouldn't have to go through 2019 again. But part of why all this planning and thinking is going on is, because all signs point towards recurring situations like this. Maybe not in the same place, maybe in different locations, but that's kind of why these conversations go on. I'm going to take another peek.
I'll just mention that we've done basically 3 projects like this: 2 in Fremont County, Iowa, after the 2011 flood, one near Highway 2, and then one about 3 miles downstream along the Fraser Bend wildlife management area, and then the one in L536 this year. And it's not a coincidence that all of them have basically centered around either Corps of Engineers Wildlife Missouri River Recovery Program, habitat land, and NRCS easements. And so like that's been a common theme for all 3 of these large scale levee setbacks along the Missouri River. And having that real estate availability and basically being able to take that burden, if you will, like off the levee sponsor has been one of the common themes that's enabled these projects to happen in the past and currently.
I guess I'm going to take one more question. So Rob Jacobson has tossed out one more question, and of course it's one that is the most complicated of all. And I'm not sure even who to direct this to, but I think that I might start with David Crane. But he's basically saying, on the riverward side of these levees, it is obviously a dynamic environment. Will sedimentation and the vegetation community dynamics that we talked about before be monitored by NRCS or the Department of Conservation or the Corps of Engineers to see how the ecological services evolve and how the protection how the protection level of the levee is impacted by that evolving ecological community?
So like I think there's probably a 2-part there, like how the ecological services are affected and maybe how the levee safety component is affected, or the long-term performance of the levee. And maybe I'll let Lowell talk to that. But I mean, I could talk forever about the ecological and biological responses of these levee setbacks. So it's getting late. So I'll just mention that when we did the large scale levee setbacks along L575 in Fremont County, Iowa, they weren't on the downstream end of a levee system where it ties back up along the tributary that runs into the Missouri River. They were just kind of like in the middle. So like there wasn't as much downstream hydraulic effects that we needed to model and make sure that were mitigated for. For this one, there's more. We're on the downstream end. We've pretty much set the levee back along the entire stretch of the Missouri River, including the downstream end. We had to make some design and construction considerations for how like the downstream end trailing levee would be, what shape that'd be left in. And so I think it's gonna, like, from like a sedimentation and like when the river gets out of the banks and starts flowing in the floodplain, we're gonna have a little bit of a different situation as far as sedimentation goes. With the velocity of the river slowing down because it's hitting this trailing levee, it's hitting the downstream end of the levee system. And so that's something that we're kind of thinking about when we're restoring we're doing the final restoration design of these borrow pits, what kind of vegetation that we're considering. But I think from like a hydraulic construction design standpoint, we've also thought about that. And I don't know, I'll let Karina or Lowell talk a little bit about that perspective. And, you know, Rob, I mean, you know how to get a hold of me too. Like, you know, the more you want to talk about this, just let me know.
So I can kind of jump in. This is Lowell on, you know, our efforts to model the Missouri River. And I guess the last time from the Corps of Engineers perspective, we did a large scale modeling effort was about 2007. And then we're currently looking at updating that modeling based on the study Jeff Bolton had mentioned. And so we don't get a whole lot of chance to do hydraulic modeling, and we probably won't have an opportunity to do it at a real frequent interval. And it's really limited, I guess, to our funding. So there won't be, I guess, a whole lot of Corps of Engineers involvement in the determining how that level of protection evolves over time. And that's really no different than other locations along the Missouri River.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the monitoring of flood carrying capacity of land, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of that going on anywhere. But I think that's part of the question that Rob was asking, you know, will there be long-term monitoring of the changes with respect to all of those pieces? Is that kind of part of the puzzle, or is that just an unfunded piece of it?
I'll weigh in here. This is Chris. From NRCS perspective, and Rob knows this, we don't have funding for studies typically, but as part of the easement program, we do monitor these sites. We monitor them annually. We'll be on site every 3 years. That's what Rob is asking, is part of his question is there going to be follow-up to see what the changes really are? Our monitoring looks at what the vegetative community is doing out there, what changes there are. So that would be, but that's a very, you know, that's once every year we're looking at that, versus if MDC is going to be involved, would they come out and they would do more, will they, and they could do more intensive studies to see how these communities, how they change over time. So we do monitor, that's part of what we're tasked with to manage this program, but not at that level. Will be where we will be monitoring the vegetative communities and the changes out there at that level. It's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of what happens in situations like this is we're creating, and Rob pointed this out, you know, we're creating experiments, but it's kind of a little mysterious, like how we monitor the impacts of those experiments, or how they play out over time in a variety of different ways. And that's coming from the science guy. So awesome. Well, you guys, it was a long talk and a bunch of really super questions. And thank you to everyone involved tonight. Thank you to Barbara for spearheading this idea, and for bringing all the partners together for this evening, the people that you've been working with all along. And Karina and Chris, you know, thank you for really pulling this together, and also pulling in our expert panel to answer some of the trickier questions that we kind of knew were going to come up. Getting a lot of comments from folks. Just thank you to all of you, and thank you for doing this project, and also sharing you know, what it means to everyone else, so that we can, as a general public, be more informed about the options that we have out there, and the impacts that they have on people and on the river. So I don't know if anyone else has anything else they want to shout out before we close this down for the night.
Steve, I just want to thank you for pulling this together and giving the opportunity for this partnership to tell our story and share it with a broader audience. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I did forget to mention that the Nature Conservancy is, for the first year, being a sponsor of the MR340 race this year, which is just a very different way of thinking about your mission of bringing people and our resources together. And I think that's innovative. And of course, we're really grateful for that. So thanks to TNC for that, amongst a lot of other things. Does anyone have anything else to add?
I really appreciate everybody's time and interest. It's fantastic. Thank you. Thanks to everybody.
Well,
totally agree with that. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you all for the time. And to everyone that tuned in tonight, thank you guys for tuning in again. And we'll see you next month with the Big Muddy Speaker Series. Have a good evening.